Hello world and welcome to Hacks. Today we are continuing to walk the learning path of the red team operator. That's right, we're on TryHackMe and we're going through the red teaming learning path. We're still in room 1 but we're on task 4, which is red team OPSEC. Learn how to apply Operation Security OPSEC process for red teams. Now, there's not that many technical interactions in this lab. It is mainly all reading. There is some questions towards the end, but I promise you the more technical stuff is coming where we start attacking Active Directory. Task 1, Introduction. Operation Security OPSEC is a term coined by the United States military. In the field of cybersecurity, let's start with the definition provided by NIST. Systematic and a proven process by which potential adversaries can be defined information and capabilities and intentions by identifying, controlling, protecting generally unclassified evidence of the planning and execution of sensitive activities. That just didn't go well as a sentence for whatever reason. The process involves 5 steps: identification of critical information, analysis of threats, analysis of vulnerabilities, assessment of risks, and application of appropriate countermeasures. Let's dive into the definition from a red team perspective. As a red team member, your potential adversaries are blue team and third parties. The blue team is considered an adversary as we are attacking the systems that they are hired to monitor and defend. Red versus blue team exercises are common to help an organization understand what threats exist in a given environment and better prepare their blue team if a real malicious attack occurs. As red teamers, even though we are abiding by the law and authorized to attack systems within a defined scope, it does not change the fact that we are acting against the blue team's objectives and trying to circumvent their security controls. The blue team wants to protect their systems while we want to penetrate them. Denying any potential adversary the ability to gather information about our capabilities and intentions is critical to maintaining OPSEC. OPSEC is a process to identify, control, and protect any information relating to the planning and execution of our activities. Frameworks such as the Lockheed Martin Cyber Kill Chain and MITRE ATT&CK help defenders identify the objectives an adversary is trying to accomplish. MITRE ATT&CK is arguably at the forefront of reporting and classifying adversary tactics, techniques, and procedures, and offers publicly accessible knowledge base as publicly available threat intelligence incident reporting as its primary data source. So yeah, what that's saying is that even as a red team, one of your mission priorities is to ensure that your operational security is strict. So you don't want the blue team getting hold of your TTPs or information about your attacks, like your domains and things like that, because then they would be able to easily block it. You can see there we have a nice diagram or a pyramid, 3 pyramid is like the strongest structure, isn't it, or something. Identify, control, protect, critical information. The OPSEC process has 5 steps: identify critical information, analyze threats, analyze vulnerabilities, assess risks, apply appropriate countermeasures. You can see there critical information, identify critical information, analyze the threats, the vulnerabilities, the risks, countermeasures. If the adversary discovers that you're scanning their network with Nmap, the blue team in our case, they should easily be able to discover the IP address being used. For instance, if you use the same IP address to host a phishing site, it won't be very difficult for the blue team to connect the 2 events and attribute them to the same actor. OPSEC is not a solution or a set of rules. OPSEC is a 5-step process to deny adversaries from gaining access to any critical information defined in Task 2. We will dive into each step and see how we can improve OPSEC as part of our red team operations. And then you just click done. Yeah, I like this. Again, it's quite it's not a weird spin on it, but it's an area I haven't thought of before as an offensive security expert, is protecting my own sort of methodologies and things like that, Granted, I haven't done many engagements where I'm actively being defended against. Normally it's allow list all my equipment so that I can just get onto your network and find the vulnerabilities, but I can understand from a red teamer why this is important. Task 2, critical information identification. What a red teamer considers critical information or worth protecting depends on the operations of the assets or tooling involved. In this setting, critical information includes, but is not limited to, the red team's intentions, capabilities, activities, and limitations. Critical information includes any information that, once obtained by the blue team, would hinder or degrade the red team's mission. You can see there we've got a nice picture showing potential sensitive information, IP addresses. If the blue team could get hold of that, they could ban it. SSH usernames and passwords, they could get in, but that, that's a bit naughty. Harvested usernames, they can block out those usernames. Phishing site on AWS, they could, not that they would want to, but they could block certain areas of AWS. And then secret questions. To identify critical information, the red team needs to use an adversarial approach and ask themselves what information an adversary, the blue team in this case, would want to know about the mission. If obtained, the adversary will be in a solid position to thwart the red team's attacks. Therefore, critical information is not necessarily sensitive information. However, it is any information that might jeopardize your plans if leaked to an adversary. The following are some examples. Client information that your team has learned. It is unacceptable to share client-specific information such as employee names, roles, and infrastructure that your team has discovered. Sharing this type of information should be kept on a need-to-know basis, as it could compromise the integrity of the operation. The least principle of least privilege (POLP) dictates that the entity, user, or process must be able to access only the information necessary to carry out its tasks. Principle of least privilege should be applied in every step taken by the red team. Sorry, I completely balked that paragraph. Red team information such as identities, activities, plans, capabilities, limitations. The adversary can use such information to better prepare to face your attacks. TTPs, or tactics, techniques, and procedures that your team use in order to emulate an attack. OS cloud hosting provider or C2 framework utilized by your team. Let's say that your team uses Pen2 for pen testing and a defender knows this. Consequently, they can keep an eye out for logs exposing the OS as Pen2. Depending on your target, there is a possibility that other attackers are also using Pen2 to launch their attacks. However, there is no reason for you to expose your OS if you don't have to. So your OS is in your operating system. So if you're not using like a traditional pen test distribution like Kali or something like that, and you're using like a very niche specific OS, then the blue team might pick up on that and block all attacks. I remember once there were attacks. I was in an environment where there were attacks coming from a specific user agent. It was a specific browser, and we were able to identify that in the logs and block that specific user agent, and the attack was thwarted. There's more to it than that, but public IP addresses that your red team will use. If the blue team gains access to this kind of information, you could quickly mitigate the attack by blocking all inbound and outbound traffic to your IP addresses, leaving you to figure out what has happened. Domain names that your team has registered. Domain names play a significant role in attacks such as phishing. Likewise, if a blue team figures out your domain names that you will be using to launch your attacks, this could simply block or sinkhole your malicious domain names to neutralize your attack. Hosted websites such as phishing websites for adversary information. Yeah, so again, with domain names, it's quite easy to tell when you're being phished. If you can just view the headers of the email, you can see that the domain name isn't a genuine domain name owned by that particular person or that particular company. Like my friend recently received an email from PayPal, and it was like an email saying that she had been paid money, and it was a scam to try and get her to send goods that somebody hadn't paid for. She thought it was a scam, sent it to me, I looked at it, and sure enough it was coming from a domain name that had no affiliation with PayPal. Good on her for picking it up that quickly. So we have some answers and questions. We have to view a site and then we will get a flag. Let's have a look. So it asks you to specify what is critical information. So your team uses Firefox exclusively to browse the internet. Is this critical information? I'd say no, because Firefox is quite a common browser. Most people use it. Your team prefers to browse the internet using Link's text-based browser. Is this critical information? I'd say yes, because that would be very specific. Your team uses Microsoft Windows 10 as their primary operating system. Is this critical information? No, I imagine in most enterprise environments, most people will be using Windows 10 or 11, version or so behind. So I'd say no. Your team uses offensive Linux distributions hosted on cloud provider X. Would you consider this critical information? I would say yes. Your team has registered the domain name webmail1.thm to host phishing sites. Would you consider this critical information? I would. And then that should give us the flag, which we can then submit to the bottom, which I've already done, and that is task 2. Task 3, threat analysis. After we identify critical information, we need to analyze threats. Threat analysis refers to identifying potential adversaries and their intentions and capabilities, adapted from the US Department of Defense Operational Security (OPSEC) Program Manual. Threat analysis aims to answer the following questions. Who is the adversary? What are the adversary's goals? What tactics, techniques and procedures do they use? What critical information have they obtained? And you can see a diagram. Who is the adversary? Adversary goals, adversary tactics. Cool. The task of the red team is to emulate an attack so that the blue team discovers its shortcomings, if any, and better becomes prepared to face incoming threats. The blue team's main objective is to ensure the security of the organization's network and systems. The intentions of the blue team are clear. They want to keep the red team out of their network. Consequently, considering the task of the red team, the blue team is considered our adversary, as each team has conflicting objectives. We should note that the blue team's capabilities might not always be known at the beginning. Malicious third-party players might have different intentions and capabilities and might pose a threat as a result. This party can be someone with humble capabilities, scanning the systems randomly looking for low-hanging fruit, such as unpatched exploitable server, or it can be a capable adversary targeting your company or client systems. Consequently, the intentions and the capabilities of the third party can make the adversaries as well. Adversary blue team, intentions keeping true design, capabilities not always known. Adversary malicious third party, varies. We consider any adversary with the intent and capability to take actions that would prevent us from completing our operations as a threat. Threat equals adversary plus intent plus capability. In other words, an adversary without the intent or capability does not pose a threat for our purposes. Try to think of at least one adversary who is not a threat and one that who is. Task 4. Vulnerability analysis. After identifying critical information and analysing threats, we can start with the third step, analysing vulnerabilities. This is not to be confused with vulnerabilities related to cybersecurity. An OPSEC vulnerability exists when an adversary can obtain critical information, analyse the findings and act in a way that would affect your plans. And you can see there we got an email with some sort of basic information in there, knowing what your Nmap scripts are going to be looking like, IP addresses, AWS infrastructure, phishing URLs, pen2. To better understand an OPSEC vulnerability as relating to red teaming, we'll consider the following scenario. You use Nmap to discover live hosts on a target subnet and find open ports on the live hosts. Moreover, you send various phishing emails leading the victim to phishing websites you are hosting. Furthermore, you are using the Metasploit framework to attempt to exploit certain software vulnerabilities. These are three separate activities. However, if you use the same IP address to carry out these different activities, this would lead to an OPSEC vulnerability. Once any hostile malicious activity is detected, the blue team is expected to take action such as blocking the source IP address, temporarily or permanently. Consequently, it would take one source IP address to be blocked for all other activities that use that IP address to fail. In other words, this would block access to the destination IP address used for the phishing server and the source IP address used by the Nmap and Metasploit framework. Another example of an OPSEC vulnerability would be an unsecured database that is used to store data received from phishing victims. If the database is not properly secured, it may lead to a malicious third party compromising the operation and could result in data being exfiltrated and used in an attack against your client's network. As a result, instead of helping your client secure their network, you would end up exposing login names and passwords to malicious people. Lax OPSEC could result in a less sophisticated vulnerabilities. For instance, consider the case where a team member posts on social media revealing your client's name. If a blue team monitors such information, it will trigger them to learn more about your team and your approaches to better prepare against expected penetration attempts. And then we've got some questions. Your red team uses THCC Hydra to find passwords for a specific login page. Moreover, they're using Metasploit framework on the same system as THC Hydra. Would you consider this an OPSEC vulnerability? As they mentioned above, if they're coming from the same IP address, then absolutely, because if one gets blocked, then the other one's completely useless. Well, the whole IP address is useless. One of the red team members posts a photo of his cat every day. Would you consider this to be OPSEC vulnerability? It would be a catastrophe, but no, it's not an OPSEC vulnerability. The red team went for dinner, took a photo and tagged every member of the team on popular social media. Would you consider this an OPSEC vulnerability? Yeah, because you're putting them all in the same place together. If you're going on site doing physical tests, someone may recognize that. It's not a good thing to do. Your red team posts on its website a list of your clients you regularly conducted red team exercises with. Would you consider this? Yeah, of course you would. I mean, that's just giving out client information. You wouldn't do that anyway, unless, you're just sort of posturing. One of your red team members posts photo of her morning coffee. Would you consider this an OPSEC vulnerability? No, but that is a good idea. I want a coffee. Task 5, risk assessment. We finished analysing the vulnerabilities, and now we can proceed to the fourth step, conducting a risk assessment. NIST defines a risk assessment as the process of identifying risks to an organisation's operations, including missions, functions, image, reputation, organisational assets, individuals, other organisations, and the nation, resulting from the operation of an information system. That is a long sentence. In OPSEC, risk assessment requires learning the possibility of an event taking place along with the expected cost of the event. Consequently, this involves assessing the adversary's ability to exploit vulnerabilities. You see there we got John the Ripper, doing some zip to John maybe, to secure.txt, a bit of an mmap, go busting, some brute forcing. One of the high level risks is determined countermeasures can be considered to mitigate the risk. We need to consider the following three factors: the efficiency of the countermeasures in reducing the risk, the cost of the countermeasures compared to the impact of the vulnerability being exploited, the possibility of the countermeasures can reveal information to the adversary. Let's revisit the two examples from the previous task. In the first example, we considered the vulnerability of scanning the network with mmap, using the Metasploit framework and hosting the phishing pages using the same public IP address. We analysed that this vulnerability as what makes it easier for the adversary to block our three activities by simply detecting one activity. Now let's assess the risk. To evaluate the risk related to this vulnerability, we need to learn the possibility of one or more of these activities being detected. We cannot answer this without obtaining some information about the adversary's capabilities. Let's consider the case where the client has Security Information and Event Management System, SIEM, in place. A SIEM is a system that allows real-time monitoring and analysis of events relating to security from different sources across the network. We expect that SIEM would make it reasonable, uncomplicated to detect suspicious activity and connect these events. As a result, we would assess the related risk as high. On the other hand, if we know the adversary has minimal resources for detecting security events, we can assess the risk related to this vulnerability as low. Let's consider the second example of an unsecured database used to store data received from a phishing page. Based on the data collected from several research groups using honeypots, we can expect various malicious bots to actively target random IP addresses on the internet. Therefore, it is only a matter of time before a system with weak security is discovered and exploited. Answer the question below. Your team uses THC Hydra to find passwords for a specific login page. Moreover, they use Metasploit framework on the same system as THC Hydra. Knowing that your target uses properly configured intrusion detection systems, would you consider this vulnerability a high risk? Yeah, absolutely, because it will be picked up instantly, and if you're using different services on the same IP address, it's just going to thwart your whole operation. Task 6, Countermeasures. The final step is applying countermeasures. The US Department of Defense Operational Security Program Manual states, countermeasures are designed to prevent an adversary from detecting critical information, provide an alternative interpretation of critical information or indicators, deception, or deny the adversary's collection system. Let's revisit the two examples we presented in the vulnerability analysis task. In the first example, we considered the vulnerability of running mmap using the Metasploit framework and hosting the phishing site using the same public IP address. The countermeasures for this seem obvious. Use a different IP address for each activity. This way you can ensure that if one activity was detected, that the public IP address being blocked, other activities will be unaffected. Sorry, I butchered that a little bit. Yeah, so ensuring that you're scanning from different IP addresses means that if one activity is detected, the rest aren't going to have an issue. In the second example, we considered the vulnerability of an unsecured database used to store data received from a phishing site. From a risk assessment perspective, we consider it as a high risk due to malicious third parties potentially looking for random easy targets. To countermeasure this, in this case, we would ensure the database is adequately secured so the data cannot be accessed by anyone except authorized personnel. This concludes the fifth element of the OPSEC process. Let's get ready before we apply all 5 elements. So yeah, there's no question there, just click done and we are done. Task 7, more practical examples. In this task, we apply 5 elements of OPSEC process as we focus on different examples of critical information related to the red team task. We will follow the following steps. 1. Identifying critical information. 2. Analysing threats. 3. Analysing vulnerabilities. 4. Assessing risk. 5. Applying appropriate countermeasures. Programs, operating systems and virtual machines used by the red team. Critical information. We are talking about the programs, the operating system, the virtual machine together. Threat analysis. The blue team is looking for any malicious or abnormal activity on the network. Depending on the surface we're connecting to, it's possible that the name of the version of the program we're using and the OS version and VM hostname could be logged. Vulnerability analysis. If the OS chosen for the given activity is too unique, it could make it easier to link activities back to your operation. The same applies to VMs with host names that stand out. For instance, on a network of physical laptops and desktops, if a new host joins with a host name Kali 2021 VM, it should be easy to be spotted by the blue team. Likewise, if you are using various security scanners, for instance, and you don't use common user agent for web-based activities. Yeah, so if the user agent stands out, it's easily detectable. Risk assessment. This risk mainly depends on which services we're connecting to. For instance, if we start a VPN connection, the VPN server will log plenty of information about us. The same applies to other services to which we might connect. Countermeasures. If the OS we're using is uncommon, it would be worth making efforts to necessarily camouflage our operating system as a different one. For VMs and physical hosts, it would be worth changing the host names to something inconspicuous or consistent with the client's naming convention, as you don't want host names such as attackbox to appear in a DHCP server logs. As for programs and tools, it's worth learning the signatures that each tool leaves on the server. Example, the figure below shows a user agent that will be logging by a remote server when running Nmap scans with the SC option when Nmap probes the web server. If a HTTP user agent isn't set at the same time running the Nmap script, the logs on the target system could log the user agent containing Nmap script engines. This can be mitigated using the script args HTTP user agent custom agent. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, user agent is like a fingerprint really. It shows you what browser you're using. So if you're just like scanning with Nmap and Nmap specifies its own sort of user agent, that would be easily identified. Same as if you're using like an outdated or a bespoke one. Okay, on to the questions. And I'm going to warn you, I have tried recording this 6 times now and I keep messing up and I just don't really understand what we're supposed to do here. I have got the answers from somebody else's Medium blog, but let's try and go through it. So, to my understanding, we have to read through each section and then assign it one of these values, and then we put the answers here with spaces between the numbers. The spaces are important because otherwise it doesn't work. So, let's read the first one and hopefully we can decipher what is being said. Knowing that their company has assigned a red team will alert the blue team to the incoming attack. That sentence really doesn't make any sense to me. The alert happens if the red team is outsourced. However, this won't be new information for the blue team if the red team is part of the company staff. That makes sense. If the blue team anticipates you, it may affect their alert level, which in turn might affect the accuracy of the results. And they're saying that this is 4. Again, I don't know. And then the next one, this will depend on the company and the blue team, and they're saying that that's 5, which is for countermeasures, which makes sense. We consider the name of the client as critical information, so surely that's 1, but it is actually number 2. We consider the client name as critical information for threats, so that does sort of make sense. We realize that we prefer to keep this piece of information hidden from the blue team. This way we can attack while they are going on with their usual routine. And they're saying that's vulnerabilities. Yeah, you wouldn't want to give the blue team knowledge of your vulnerabilities. And the last one, the client name is critical information. So that does make sense. It's just kind of hard to get your head around it at first. Or maybe, like I say, this question format just isn't my area. I'm just not sort of good at processing the information this way. I mean, come on, that first paragraph, that's insanely difficult to read. Knowing that their company has assigned a red team will alert. Knowing that the company has assigned a red team will alert. I don't know. When a sentence is broken up like that and I can't understand it, it really affects my ability to sort of process that information. But maybe that's just me. I'm sure you had no trouble getting through this, but yeah, I struggled with these challenges. But yeah, you can submit those and go through to the next one. Let's have a quick look. So, collected client information, what would you put that as? Potentially critical information. They've already given us the first answer, so that's 1. And malicious users might target random vulnerable targets depending on their motives and skills. For instance, if you have retrieved the password of one of the employees via phishing and the online database is not adequately secured, it will be like helping the third parties break into your client. And they're saying that that is 5 for countermeasures, I believe. So you have to put in countermeasures for this. Again, it's quite ambiguous. It doesn't really give you like a definitive answer. It's just like presuming that's what they mean. I feel like this could have been more to the point. It's very vague. If the information you are collecting is not stored securely, it will be an easy target for malicious third parties, and this apparently is 4 for risks. Yeah, okay, it's a risk. This would expand beyond the blue team. Malicious third parties can use information you have collected to harm your client. Apparently that's 3 for vulnerabilities. I don't see how it relates, if that makes sense. It's really sort of having to read between the lines, and yeah. Just don't like these questions whatsoever. Any collected client information, be it through OSINT and other means, should be treated as critical information, and that is 2 for threats, because yeah, maybe it's just the tense I'm not getting, or like how one leads to the other. Again, this is no criticism of the person who created this, it's more of a criticism of my own understanding of it and being able to process this information. It just doesn't make an awful lot of sense to me of why they do it like this. It seems unnecessarily, not difficult, but unnecessarily ambiguous. Task 8, summary. In this room we have covered how the OPSEC process can be applied to red team operations. OPSEC process have 5 elements. 1. Identify critical information. Critical information includes but is not limited to red team's intentions, capabilities, activities and limitations. 2. Analyze threats. Threat analysis refers to the identifying potential adversaries and their intentions and capabilities. 3. Analyze vulnerabilities. An OPSEC vulnerability exists when an adversary can obtain critical information, analyze the findings and act in a way that would affect your plans. 4. Assess risk. Risk assessment requires learning the possibility of an event taking place along with the expected cost of that event. 5. Apply the appropriate countermeasures. Countermeasures are designed to prevent an adversary from detecting critical information, provide an alternative interpretation of critical information or indicators, deception, or deny the adversary's collection system. OPSEC is a process that can be applied outside the military. This room covered how it can be applied to red team operations. Furthermore, it is not difficult to apply it to other fields such as marketing or industry. This process will help prevent the adversary from putting the pieces together, thus preventing them from taking timely action. Well said, and yeah, memorize the 5 elements of OPSEC and learn how to apply them to different aspects of your cybersecurity work, and that's complete. So this was a fairly decent room. The information in it was great. Again, I never thought of looking at a red team engagement that way, where you yourself are protecting your own information and your own techniques, tactics and procedures from the adversary, thus being the blue team, because the red team are the bad guys, the blue team are the good guys. But then, as is the case in the world with war and things like that, there is no good team and bad team, it's just people going at each other. Yeah, but with the exception of the questions in Task 7, it was a great room. It's been educational, and again, that's just my personal preferences with the questions in Task 7. Maybe I haven't had enough coffee this morning and I just wasn't getting what the creator was trying to deliver with those questions. They just seemed unnecessarily ambiguous in that I just couldn't decipher the information in there with what category it was trying to reference to. Maybe if it was more straightforward, maybe because I'm sort of rushing through these rooms a little bit instead of actually sitting down and thinking about it enough. Let me know if you had trouble with it. I'd be happy to know, how you got along with it. But yeah, I was speaking to one of my colleagues about it actually, and he was saying that he thought it was a little bit odd as well, that challenge. Perhaps they should have done something more visually, but again, that's my personal preference on how I like to consume this information. I don't like to be stuck on a particular room for too long, and if it's questions like that where I'm not actually really learning anything, the question seems designed to be hard for no other reason than just to be hard. But again, I could be completely missing the point. Someone who asked Reddit could have just flown through it really easily. It just seems to me that it was just a little bit unnecessary. Anyway, I like the room. The creator did a good job with all that, with obviously my pet peeves of Task 7, and I hope you enjoyed it. That's all from me for now. Let me know how you're getting along with the red team rooms. I'm enjoying them so far. Give me a thumbs up, maybe like, maybe subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Kind regards.